Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, May 19th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. It looks like a beautiful day in Riverside, with the high temperature expected to reach 82.3 degrees and a comfortable low of 58.0 tonight. Perfect weather for getting out and about. Coming up on today's show, we are examining the significant implications of the dispute over ballot barcodes for the integrity and future of U.S. elections. We will also be taking a close look at how proposed tariffs by Trump could translate to changes in prices for everyday items at major retailers like Walmart. We have all these developing stories and more in-depth analysis for you right after this. Stay tuned to Alex's News for the full picture. We're starting this morning with a story that's really scanning the headlines, a significant and quite contentious executive order concerning our election ballots. For more on this, we have our news reporter Ethan with us. Ethan, this order from President Trump seems to be causing quite a stir.
It certainly is, Grace. Back in March of this year, President Trump issued an executive order titled Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of American Elections. According to the Perplexity API, this order is aimed at a major overhaul of U.S. election systems. Specifically, it directs the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, to amend federal guidelines to effectively ban the use of barcodes and QR codes for encoding voter choices on ballots, with an exception for accommodating voters with disabilities.
A ban on barcodes and QR codes? That sounds like a significant shift. What's the timeline for this, and what exactly is the EAC being asked to do?
The Perplexity API also notes that the EAC was given 180 days from the order's issuance in March. That means they have roughly 4 months remaining until sometime in September to review, update, and potentially recertify voting systems under these new proposed standards. A key part of this directive is to revoke previous certifications for systems that include these codes.
So, what's the driving force behind this order? Why target barcodes and QR codes specifically? It seems like they're trying to, quote, decode a problem.
That's a good way to put it, Grace. This directive appears to be fueled by persistent misinformation and conspiracy theories, particularly those stemming from the 2020 election. Reporting from WFTV, Click2Houston.com, and the Las Vegas Sun, along with information from the Perplexity API, indicates these theories allege that barcodes and QR codes on ballots were a source of election tampering or fraud.
And how widespread is the use of these types of machines currently? Are we talking about a few isolated counties or something more extensive?
It's quite extensive. These types of voting machines, often called ballot marking devices or BMDs, which print a human-readable summary alongside the machine-readable code, are utilized in hundreds of counties across 19 states. WFTV and the Las Vegas Sun point out that states like Georgia, South Carolina, and Delaware have even implemented them statewide.
With such widespread use, what do election officials and experts say about the security of these systems? Are these concerns about tampering valid?
Well, election officials and many experts maintain that these systems are secure and accurate. The Perplexity API and WFTV report that routine testing and auditing procedures are in place. They also emphasize that ballots using such codes typically include a plain text, human-readable list of the voters' choices, which voters can verify themselves and can be used in audits. Despite these assurances, WFTV notes that concerns about potential vulnerabilities do persist among some voters and computer scientists. Interestingly, some places, like Colorado under its Secretary of State, had already moved away from QR codes even before this executive order in an effort to boost voter confidence, as reported by WFTV.
It sounds like there's a disconnect. Has this executive order faced any legal challenges?
Absolutely. The Perplexity API details that a coalition of civil rights groups, for instance, has contested the legality of the order. Their argument is that President Trump doesn't possess the authority to direct the EAC to alter the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, or VVSG, outside the formal congressionally established processes. These processes normally include extensive public comment periods and stakeholder input. Critics also argue the president cannot unilaterally impose mandatory election procedures, as election administration is primarily a state function under the U.S. Constitution. The timeline is also seen as unrealistically tight.
So with these legal challenges and a tight deadline, what has the U.S. Election Assistance Commission actually done in response to the order?
As of today, May 19, 2025, the Perplexity API indicates there's no specific, publicly available information detailing the EAC's formal response or any progress in developing these new guidelines. Similarly, the precise status of the various legal challenges isn't detailed in available reports, though WFTV and the Perplexity API suggest they were anticipated to be ongoing.
This must be creating a lot of uncertainty and potential headaches for the states that use these systems. What kind of impact are we talking about?
The potential impact is significant. Transitioning away from these systems would be a costly endeavor. WFTV reports some estimates reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars per county. For example, Los Angeles County officials have defended their current system's accuracy and highlighted the substantial replacement cost. The situation is particularly complex in states like Georgia, where, as WFTV notes, the state legislature had previously voted to ban QR codes but hadn't allocated funds for the transition, creating potential complications even before this federal order. States like South Carolina, which uses the express vote system, and Delaware would also face considerable logistical and financial hurdles, according to the Perplexity API.
Hundreds of thousands per county is a staggering figure. Is there any clear evidence that these barcodes or QR codes have actually led to election fraud?
That's a key point of contention. The Perplexity API states that, as of today, there have been no documented instances of election fraud or systemic vulnerabilities directly attributable to the use of barcodes or QR codes on ballots in states like Georgia, South Carolina, Delaware, or more broadly across the U.S. The concerns, as highlighted by both the Perplexity API and WFTV, appear to be rooted in that misinformation we discussed earlier, rather than substantiated evidence of barcode-specific vulnerabilities leading to fraudulent outcomes. It seems the bar for evidence hasn't quite been met.
So if the evidence isn't there, and given that election administration is largely a state matter, how could the federal government even enforce such a change?
That's the tricky part. The VVSG, the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, are, by name, voluntary federal guidelines. However, the Perplexity API explains that many states have laws requiring their voting systems to comply with the current VVSG, effectively making them mandatory in those jurisdictions. The executive order has threatened to withhold congressionally directed federal funding from states whose systems don't align with the administration's preferences. This is a potential, albeit legally contestable, leverage point. But the president lacks direct enforcement authority over state election administration, and the EAC itself can't force states to change certified systems unless state laws mandate compliance with updated VVSG.
It sounds like a very complex situation with many moving parts. What's the outlook here, Ethan?
Indeed, Grace, President Trump's March 2025 executive order has really set the stage for a protracted battle. It involves the EAC, state election officials, the courts, and voting rights advocates. While the order aims for a swift change, the practicalities of cost, the often voluntary nature of these federal guidelines, ongoing legal challenges, and a clear lack of evidence demonstrating barcode-specific fraud make the future implementation and impact of this directive very uncertain as of today. It's a real code of conduct debate for our electoral process. The information we've discussed comes from sources including WFTV, the Las Vegas Sun, and the Perplexity API.
A very tangled web indeed. Thanks so much, Ethan, for breaking that down for us and shedding some light on this developing story.
You're welcome, Grace.
Well, from one kind of inflation to another, it seems the cost of your shopping trip might be going up, and it's not just due to the usual market forces. We're talking about tariffs and how President Trump's policies could soon mean higher prices at Walmart. Joining us to unpack this is our economics reporter, Chloe. Chloe, this sounds like it could hit a lot of household budgets.
It certainly could, Grace. The central concern, as of today, May 19th, is that President Trump's tariffs on imported goods, particularly from China, could lead to Walmart shoppers seeing increased prices. This isn't just speculation. Even the president's own Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has acknowledged this possibility.
President Trump hasn't been shy about calling out big companies before. What's his message to Walmart amidst these concerns? Is he expecting them to just grin and bear the costs?
Exactly. According to multiple reports over the weekend, President Trump took to social media with some pretty direct warnings for Walmart. He urged them not to raise prices and, in his words, to, quote, eat the tariffs, end quote, pointing out the company's significant profits. He's essentially saying Walmart should absorb these extra costs themselves, rather than passing them on to consumers.
Eat the tariffs, that's quite a directive. So how is his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent navigating this? Is he echoing the president's firm stance?
Well, Secretary Bessent is walking a bit of a tightrope. Recent reports indicate he conceded that Walmart might indeed pass some of these tariff-related costs on. He confirmed he's spoken with Walmart CEO Doug McMillon. Interestingly, Bessent reportedly suggested to McMillon that declining gasoline prices could act as an offset for consumers, cushioning the blow of other price hikes. He also implied that Walmart executives might be presenting a, quote, worst-case scenario, end quote, during their earnings calls, perhaps to manage expectations.
A worst-case scenario? Or just retail reality? So while the administration is suggesting offsets and urging Walmart to absorb costs, what are Walmart executives themselves saying? This sounds like it could be a real cart-astrophe for budget-conscious shoppers.
That's a good way to put it, Grace. Walmart executives, including their CFO John David Rainey, have been quite clear that higher prices are an emerging reality. CEO Doug McMillon stated just last Thursday, May 15th, that even with tariffs on some goods reportedly being reduced to 30% from a previous high of 145%, price increases are already appearing or are simply unavoidable. For the average person, a tariff is essentially a tax on imported goods, so if Walmart has to pay more to bring products into the country, they're likely to charge more at the checkout.
A 30% tariff is still a significant jump. Are we talking about price hikes across the board, or will certain aisles be hit harder than others?
It seems some categories will be more affected. Walmart anticipates these increases particularly in areas like electronics and toys, where a 30% tariff could translate into double-digit price hikes for consumers. It's also come to light as some news outlets have reported that Walmart had previously issued private warnings to the White House about the potential for empty shelves and higher prices due to these tariffs. So this isn't a new concern for them.
So Walmart isn't just going to roll over and play quote-quote shelf games with these costs. What's their official strategy for dealing with this tariff pressure?
Their strategy involves officially announcing plans to raise prices on certain products, especially those impacted by tariffs on imports from China. However, they are trying to be strategic. CEO Doug McMillon has stated that Walmart will strive to keep food prices, quote, as low as we can, end quote. But even some food items might not be spared, as tariffs are impacting things like bananas, avocados, and coffee imported from countries such as Costa Rica, Peru, and Colombia. For general merchandise, though, price adjustments are definitely on the table.
It sounds like even our morning cup of joe might get a jolt. When can shoppers expect to really feel these increases?
According to reports, these price increases have actually been occurring gradually since April of this year, 2025, and they're expected to continue. We might see more noticeable rises with seasonal items, like back-to-school merchandise later this summer. So it's more of a steady climb than a sudden shock.
After Secretary Bessent's chat with Walmart CEO, did the administration's tune change at all, or are they still tariff ICLY committed to this path?
Secretary Bessent did acknowledge that Walmart would likely absorb some of the tariff costs themselves, but he also conceded that some cost pressures would inevitably be passed on to consumers. He cited narrow retail margins, which is basically the small amount of profit retailers make on each item sold, as a reason why they can't absorb everything. As of this morning, Walmart hadn't commented on that specific conversation between Besant and McMillan, nor have they issued new official statements beyond their earlier communications about these pricing pressures. They also haven't directly addressed President Trump's demand to, quote, eat the tariffs, end quote, in a public statement.
And what's the administration's broader justification for these tariffs, especially if they're causing such uncertainty for businesses and potentially higher prices for everyday Americans?
Secretary Besant has defended the administration's use of tariffs and the uncertainty they admittedly create by framing them as a negotiating tactic. The idea is that these tariffs put pressure on other countries, including China, in ongoing trade negotiations. So from the administration's perspective, it's a tool to achieve broader economic goals, even if there's some short-term pain.
It certainly paints a picture of significant tension between trade policy and the price tags we all face. A real checkout challenge for many. Chloe, thank you for breaking that down for us and helping us understand the bottom line.
You're welcome, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In international relations, the UK and the European Union are set to announce new deals and renew ties at an upcoming summit 5 years after Brexit. These developments, occurring under the existing trade and cooperation agreement, aim to ease travel for UK citizens through measures like e-gate access at European airports and the introduction of pet passports. While the Labour Party sees potential economic benefits, concerns remain about the clarity of the UK's strategic vision in these efforts to enhance cooperation and mitigate Brexit's disruptions. Turning to severe weather, the central United States is bracing for more storms after a devastating tornado outbreak from May 15 to 18, 2025. This sequence spawned at least 33 tornadoes across the Midwest and Southeast, including a violent EF4 in southern Illinois and an EF3 that struck the greater St. Louis area, Missouri, on May 16. That St. Louis tornado caused 5 deaths and extensive damage. Across multiple states, at least 28 people lost their lives, with Kentucky particularly hard hit, as a tornado killed at least 19 in Somerset and London. Over 462,000 customers remain without power, and federal support has been offered as communities begin the long recovery process. In U.S. immigration news, the Department of Homeland Security and ICE are reinstating the SEVIS records of thousands of international students whose legal statuses were abruptly terminated in recent months. Over 1,800 students and recent graduates, some on optional practical training, were affected, leading to at least 65 lawsuits challenging the unexplained revocations. While reactivation letters are being sent, some students have already left the country or lost opportunities, and lawyers note these letters don't address visa revocations by the State Department. The terminations have been linked to a broader Trump-era immigration crackdown. In Polish politics, right-wing populists are hopeful following the first round of the presidential election on May 18, 2025. Centrist candidate Rafał Trzaskowski secured a narrow lead with 31.3% of the vote, closely followed by right-wing populist Karol Nawrocki at 29.5%. This closer-than-expected result sets up a competitive runoff on June 1st. Nawrocki, supported by the Law and Justice Party, champions a sovereignist anti-immigration platform, while Trzaskowski advocates for a pro-European reformist agenda. Another right-wing candidate, Sławomir Mencen, garnered around 14 to 15% of the vote. And in Colorado Springs, a couple is set to go on trial over an alleged staged cross-burning in front of a campaign sign for Yemi Mobolade, who later became the city's first black mayor during the 2023 election. Ashley Blackloud and a co-defendant are charged with making a threat, though they claim their actions were political theater protected by free speech. Prosecutors argue the act, which included a racial slur on the sign, was premeditated to deceive the public and generate sympathy. One defendant has implicated Mobolade in planning the stunt, an accusation he denies. Mobolade is scheduled to testify as a victim. Another individual has already pleaded guilty in connection with the hoax. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud text-to-speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.